All right. Welcome back to the Loud Sound Epicenter podcast. Today I am joined by my good friend, Paul Fahrenheit, and I could not ask for a better guest because today we are talking about Generation Z and some cultural artifacts that have made an impact on definitely both of us and probably a lot of you as well. And I wanted to start off with Cartoon Network, but I want to hand it over to my good buddy Paul to start off some of the things that made an impression on you.
Sorry, I was muted. I was talking and then I realized I was muted. Yeah. Yeah, we're a couple years apart, Ace. You grew up. I don't want you to age dox yourself or whatever like that, but it's like you're a couple of years older than I did. So we've kind of got like a sort of overlapping view of the early 2000s and all the cartoons that came around in early 2000. And this sort of like, I think, there are people who are like aficionados of the whole thing. Like who actually study Cartoon Network with like a scholastic rigor and have like specific eras, like the golden era from like 1990 to like I think like 2002, 2003, and like the silver era from like 2003 to like 2000 like 5, 6 when they did the logo change, and then the bronze era up until like, and then like the basically the fucking Cartoon Network Kali Yuga when Steven Universe and shit comes around. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, we both have particular like we both have particular different tastes of different sort of series, and we both watch different series by virtue of being a few years separate. But I think each sort of television series that Cartoon Network pulled out, also not just Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon is the other one. Like, the big litmus test for figuring out if you're a Zoomer is, did you grow up watching SpongeBob? If yes, then you're a Zoomer. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, Nickelodeon, not so much the Disney Channel because I am not a woman and did not watch the Disney Channel. So I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's just the general outline of what we're talking about. We could segue over into like outside of cartoon stuff, maybe like, Game Boys and DSs and shit. Like, but basically I just figured this will just kind of be a conversation, almost reminiscing over like early childhood and the sort of media that we were all inculcated in as a part of this, early 2000s anti-culture, if you will. If the audience will excuse that sort of long, rambly, introduction into the kind of stuff we're talking about.
Sure. Well, to speak on what you just said about things outside of Cartoon Network, I have one of the most influential artifacts from probably our childhood and our school library as well. And of course, this was basically a franchise, not just in literary form, but you grew up. You grew up at
uh,
the right time. You also enjoyed the movies. I remember there were billboards in my area
yeah,
for at least.
enjoyed's a word for it.
Yeah, it's I don't know, it's kind of just one of those things that it was kind of merging school and some of our entertainment, not just exclusive to TV. And so stuff like that I think is I was trying to find another thing. Paul can speak on it. It's part of the reason why we're late, but I was trying to find those. Do you remember what they were even called? Because I forget the name, but it was those digital animals that you would have to feed.
I don't, dude. There were like 50,000 of those. Like the only one that comes to my mind is like Webkins or something like that, and even that could be just like horribly not what you're talking about. But no, yeah, no, there were tons of like those freaking of those like goddamn, you know. I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of drawing a blank here, but I know the kind of shit you're talking about, like Club Penguin and all this other stuff, like the oh yeah, they're saying in the chat like Tamagotchi or whatever the
That's
fuck that
it. I
is.
think that's it. Thank you,
Yeah.
Danielle. Yeah, no, just
So-
little niche things like that. And I know it's very childish looking back, but honestly, stuff like that. And I know you wanted to get into the Clone Wars specifically, which I think is a good segue. But
Yeah.
just these little things, like I was talking to my friend earlier today. If you remember, like the commercials from back then, like the Campbell's soup, or the Chef Boyardee commercial, and a lot of
Yeah.
like the random ads that you just nostalgically remember, stuff like that. I think is really important.
Yeah,
So
I'm sure there are compilations on YouTube too. I've never gone and looked for them because I don't like living in the past, which is ironic because I'm a history guy. But Yeah, that's true. There was kind of a certain feel of the era, but at the same time, it was like there wasn't a particular feel of the era. It wasn't like, Thomas talks about that the 80s and the 90s had a particular aesthetic to them, had a sort of particular feel to them. And it's like the early 2000s, I mean, kind of sorta, but at the same time not really. It was really more like it was like the 90s, but censored a little bit. That's what the early 2000s felt like, at least being a kid in the early 2000s. But this was back, this is kind of what everyone compares in their mind our current situation to back when everyone was, taking the blue pill, back when everyone was living in the pod and even eating the bugs and didn't really care so much for political discourse or anything unless you were a fucking weirdo. Um, but yeah, I mean, but like come like the mid 2000s, right? Like, 2008, 2009. Um, and people, I don't want to say people are starting to notice, but it's like, even I noticed that, like, as my childhood went on, there was a distinct drop off in quality in the sort of media I was consuming. Like it was building up for a little while. It was building up, things were getting better and better, and I was enjoying things, more, and things were getting more complicated. And then you hit like this high point around, I'd say, everyone says it'd be around a different time, but I think 2012 I've heard was the peak of sort of the early 2000s kind of like media, and then after 2012 it starts going downhill. And I mean, this isn't just freaking TV shows, and I'll talk about the Clone Wars a little bit in a couple of minutes, but it's like this is also like early YouTube culture, like Smosh, like epic rap battles of history, like
Right.
FPS Russia, like all of these sort of things back when YouTube was kind of the Wild West, back when you could actually go on and drop the N-word 55 times and no one would really care, and they say the past is a foreign country, and really that is true. Like, even if you're looking at like the early 2000s, like I remember, coming home from middle school on the bus with my first phone that had LTE connection. I was just watching videos, and it all felt fresh and new, and like in some ways weird. It's weird saying this, but it's like, to Zoomers, a lot of this online shit actually felt genuine. Like there was a sort of genuine feeling to, watching a Smosh video back when that was in the cultural zeitgeist, or seeing FPS Russia drive a fucking tank to the White Castle drive-through or something like that. And yeah, I mean, I guess I'll turn it back over to you, but there was a sort of feeling, and it's had massive detrimental effects, which we're seeing now when everyone basically thinks they're schizophrenic of that sort of unlimited access to the internet. But this very much shaped sort of the Zoomer consciousness and the Zoomer psyche.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what you were describing earlier was the pre-Gamergate era of the internet, because like you said earlier about the 90s, when everything got decentralized and we got away from MTV and everything kind of coming from one source, a monolith culture. The fact that you have the internet and some of these TV shows and online, I think that's when, as we said in the Prude stream about Fallout, that's when the internet culture was untampered with and you could investigate freely and there were no censorship. And I just think that kind of like you said, Wild West, I think is the perfect description, because, comment sections were crazy. I know people cite the Breitbart in 2016 as no holds bar and stuff like that. There was a lot of freedom back then that we kind of took for granted probably at the time. I was a little out of the loop to properly, indulge in that stuff. But I just looking back in retrospect, we really did have a good time, that whether we want to admit it or not. So
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah. And in many ways, a lot of Zoomers, probably pretty much all Zoomers, their whole conception of self is based around, you see the meme, me leaving the movie theater after adopting the main character's personality. But in many ways, like a lot of Zoomers' conception of self comes from these sort of, childhood shows, whether that's intentional or unintentional. But it's like there was a certain theme with each of these shows, and it's one of those things that's really hard to like hit on, but it's like, whether the shows always seemed like extremely fucking serious for kid shows, right? comparatively. The prime example, the Clone Wars, was like my biggest influence. It's actually one of the reasons why I joined the army. But but like in the Clone Wars, you were just having like dudes just get like killed execution style, and like being crushed to death and fucking like being devoured by monsters and shit, and being cut in half by lightsabers. And it was there wasn't blood or anything, like there was a little bit every now and again, but like that shit was brutal for a kid to be watching. And you combine this with I never played GTA 5, but like games like GTA 5, you're big on the Rockstar stuff, all coming out, and it's like all of this Zoomer media, even when it was less serious, fucking violent undertones to them. I don't want to say, it's almost trite to say Zoomers grew up being desensitized to violence. And that's not to say Zoomers grew up with violence, but Zoomers grew up with like, not, I don't think, perceiving what violence really is and what it feels like and what its consequences are. I mean, I don't know what you think on that. I don't know if I'm just coming out of left field with this, but
I think the cartoon violence just showed it's kind of how Tarantino talks about the way he depicts it. It's like you want to categorize it, you want to show it alongside the story. And so it's not glorifying it or saying this is cool. It's just like part of life that you see it on the screen. And so I think our generation growing up with like GTA and some of like well, I guess some of the movies after the 90s kind of was trying to normalize a lot of the things that would usually get, like an X rating. So I don't know how much of that really plays a role when we're talking about these cartoons, but I just think by the 2000s, a lot of like the 80s, not letting kids show what you would usually show them or wouldn't show them. I just feel like that standard went away, and so it was really like the Wild West for like writing too. And I wanted to talk about how our stuff has a lot of range, and the fact that, like you mentioned SpongeBob earlier, I think the difference between what you said, Steven Universe, and the golden age of Cartoon Network is adults could really get by with the cartoons. I mean, I know it's a little bit childish, but the writing was definitely stronger. And I don't know,
You know
maybe.
what? If you let me interrupt you real quick, and I'll let you
Sure.
get back to your point, but that's an interesting thing. It's like, this is the entire reason why the Brony fandom exists, right? Is because these writers of these shows always figured that they're going to be parents watching the shows with them. So every so often, and this is back when shows were well written, they would have like an adult that only, or not an adult, they would have a joke that only an adult would really get, and and this is the case throughout all of these cartoon series, and a lot of them, the plot themselves were things that adults could get invested in and project things onto and follow. So yeah, you're completely correct with that.
And it might also be the writers that were putting together these cartoons. They probably had like a portfolio of other interests outside of cartoons that inspires the writing. And so when I bring up the 90s, which is a theme on the show, but it's kind of a crutch, but I think the fact that you had, probably guys who were into Westerns, or they're into, probably 40s crime drama. I think you put guys like that and tell them to make a cartoon, you're going to get stuff that stands the test of time more so than Steven Universe, which I imagine is just post Gamergate inspired indie writers. And a friend of mine from school was telling me he was explaining how the fact that Gamergate happened to the gaming industry probably has more to do with the fact that it was one of the most decentralized industries compared to others. And so it's very easy
Yeah.
for journalists to infiltrate and have these partisan, activism in places that normally would take longer. Like, as we know now, it's gotten to everything. But before then, when you have this indie culture that probably doesn't have a lot of outside influence, all you're going to get is the activism. And so, as we
Well, and
saw with.
I feel like, I'm sure people who are like more in the know on this, like I really am just talking from a consumer's perspective, but I'm sure like every industry had its own version of Gamergate. It just wasn't like published, like, like I said, people who study Cartoon Network scholastically and understand like the ins and outs of the workings of it. Same thing with Nickelodeon, right? I'm sure there were times when like there were like these great big names of writers that these guys could probably rattle off who wrote all these great shows. and they were removed for like political or profit or whatever reasons. And yeah, Gamergate was just kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. It's like people, even as the 2000s kind of shifted and the cultural impetus shifted from, because in the early 2000s, it really was on animated cartoons. It really was on being on this sort of last hurrah of the silver screen of television. But then, come the mid 2000s, around 2012 is the really big watershed year when video games really reach their peak of kind of their own sort of experience. And the writing is fantastic, and all the great writers were going into video games and not television. And so, when Gamergate, hit in, I think, 2014, that kind of ended that ended like the whole, media, I don't have a word for it, but that sort of media regime of the early 2000s. And that's when we kind of, ever since then, we're living in this sort of impoverished time. Movies took a tank. No one really reads books anymore. No one, except for weirdos like me. And if they do read, they don't read new books, right? And so, all of this kind of comes. Gamergate was kind of like really the moment where, I don't want to say lost its innocence, but it's like, media really did. Everyone became conscious of the fact that media was going into the shitter.
I think the word you were looking for was probably Overton window. And when you have a standard like that limiting creativity, it's like you said with these post Gamergate shows, it creates an echo chamber. I know that's kind of trite, but the fact that you don't have some of that off the wall Tarantino-esque whatever in the golden age of Cartoon Network, all you're gonna get is this 2010s. Forget about like decentralized culture. I don't even know what to call that decade overall, but I just think, to go with your point, I think that's pretty well summarized. Oros sends $9.99. Thank you. And he says the biggest thing about Zoomers is how low our generation's sense of self-worth is. We have such an utter lack of seriousness and sacredness. We have a lack of sacred cows. No wonder we're all becoming paleo. Yeah, that's sort of the irony, is like, since we don't have like I guess what Ayn Rand would call the hero worship today, we sort of go before the 21st century to look for some of the more comparable like cultural figures. And I guess that's kind of inevitable, since we're definitely not seeing it in this century, not yet at least. And so I know you talk about how maybe America could create something. I know that's kind of up in the air right now, but I think that's why we're seeing, like as I'm very much a paleocon, and so I'm reading all these people past their prime, but I think that's really all you can do right now, just to look for some value, is to check out older stuff, because that's before our peak, and that's before you could argue the American peak. You would have to look back, unless something's going to come along. And
well, my buddy Oros there, he makes a very good point, and he speaks to the sort of a lack of self-esteem amongst Zoomers. And in many ways, I think the best way to describe the Zoomers is kind of like the middle child of history. That's the Zoomers. I'm sure the millennials have claimed that before, but no, the millennials, they're not that. Like y'all, I guess the millennials could be counted under that, but it's like, for the Zoomers, they grew up at like peak modernity. They very much, we very much grew up without any sort of foundational figures, any sort of, as you said, great hero worship, because it had all been more or less dismantled, all right, and replaced with, TV series and video games. And so that's why it's like, the Zoomers, that's why the Zoomers worship people like John Marston. That's why the Zoomers worship people like Joshua Graham. That's why the Zoomers worship, fucking characters from Star Wars and from other franchises. It's because these were the heroes that we grew up with, and they were fictional, right? Call of Duty Black Ops 2, how many people, you hear fucking Frank Woods, "You can't kill me," in like middle school and high school and all that, So, and that's the thing. It's not our fault. I don't want to make it sound like, Zoomers are beyond redemption, although some might say Zoomers are beyond redemption. But but really, I do think that it's I guess the Generation Alpha or whatever they're called now, they're really going to be the people that are going to be at the forefront of when the wheels of history start turning again. And I think you can see this in the fact that like media is so trash that people are actually looking back to old stuff, to pre-internet stuff, to me personally, I'm a big literary guy, and I'm looking into the Western canon and all of that. And you've had many young Zoomers, a very significant minority, joining the dissident right, looking back to these old texts to gain meaning in their sort of early adulthood, because they weren't exposed to them in childhood, and therefore they don't have this this sense of identity. They're just rootless, and so they're trying to dig their own roots. I know this is sort of long and rambly, but that's kind of, as to Oros's point, this is why our self-esteem is so low, is because, well, there is no self for us to esteem. Our self is out there in sort of the endless ether of the internet. And in many ways, it's Schrodinger's cat. We're everywhere and nowhere, right? We don't have a sense of groundedness. We don't have a sense of place. We don't have a sense of purpose, all right? And I think the work that the Zoomers are gonna end up doing as they start growing up and getting older is try to rebuild or reclaim or plant new trees and roots for our children, the generation after Generation Alpha, to sort of actually have these things that we never had, and reclaim these things that we never had.
Well, that's why I like, you and your mutuals and everyone we've talked to. I mean, one of the things that we're trying to bring back is social capital. I know Thomas talks a lot about that. You can imagine me trying to talk about Zoomer topics with Thomas. There might be, a limiting principle to that, but obviously don't hold it against him. But when he talks about, the mob and some of the social capital that you probably wouldn't expect from the internet. I think the internet is a good source for finding a lot of that stuff if you find it in the right places. And so, stuff that, it probably better than me, but, some of these more community based, kind of conference type stuff, I think that that's really going to show people that, the online culture doesn't have to stay exclusively online. There's plenty of people out there that again grew up with the commercials, watched the shows, but maybe they have forgotten about it. Or for me personally, I didn't appreciate it until it was over, until Gamergate was already in full swing, and I didn't even understand why that was happening at that time. So stuff like that is, like you said, somebody in the chat goes, the paleo sensibility, that's definitely going to become more relevant, because we're constantly going to be looking back and finding what works and what doesn't. And so, yeah, no, I agree with you that we're going to be finding solace in a lot of stuff that people might say is just a glorified hobby or a waste of time. I think there's going to be a lot of stuff that people turn to, and it's going to have positive effects on us as a generation overall.
Very much so. So now I think, we're a quarter of an hour. No, a quarter of an hour. Fuck no. We're 25 minutes in. There we go. Sorry, I'm thinking hours are 100 minutes. I'm an idiot. We've gotten into sort of a general outline. You wanted to talk about some specific stuff, like some specific franchise. I don't want to say franchises, but like, TV series. I talked a little bit about the Clone Wars earlier. I know you wanted to talk about one. I think that was that kid. Yeah, that was Kids Next Door.
That's
which
right.
I grew up watching. I very much like Kids Next Door. Kids Next Door was one of that series that really, it's like one of those kid power fantasies where all the kids have like this secret agency, and they have all this high tech shit. None of the adults are the wiser, and yeah, it's like, you just very easily could project yourself on one or another character, and and like go out and play around, like, give yourself your own number. And there was also, like, back in the early internet days, like the Cartoon Network website had like the little click and play flash games around Kids Next Door, and it would give you your own stuff, and it was always the coolest stuff to me, and that's that sort of thing. KND is just one of these series where it's like, young kids would watch it without any sense of bearing in the world, and they're like, yeah, I'm gonna go out and be the next super agent. I'm gonna go out and, like, become a Fed, which is basically what KND was training people to be.
That's right. Maybe K&D was a psyop and we didn't know it. That's the other, promising recruiting tool for the young people. But you know,
Being a Fed is cool, kids.
that's right. Very, very subversive, very subtle indoctrination. But another thing too, I don't know if people realize this, but I think if you look at this now, you're gonna find it. Kids Next Door was also our first multicultural show. I know a lot of people don't really look at it in that context, but I mean, your cast is kind of all over the place. A lot of the team isn't exactly, monolithic. So, but it worked. That was not like a big deal on the show. It was just one of those things that just so happened to be the case. And to kind of look at it through this modern lens, there's a lot of like crazy stuff that happens with some of those episodes. I remember there was one where Nigel was basically an MK Ultra victim. He was living in this like brainwashed alternative reality. And anyways, that was just an episode that stood out to me. There's another where like the adults are stealing like the crust from kids' eyes and turning them into pies.
Oh yeah, I remember that. That was disgusting.
There's a lot of, I mean, that takes a
The
lot of like
ones
off the wall creativity.
the ones that stick out to me, the ones I remember was when I'm number two, I forget his name, the fat kid.
Yeah.
Was like the sheriff of the high school, and like the different parts of the not the high school, the elementary school, and different parts of the elementary school were like the Wild West. And like he'd go to the gym and get ambushed by like the freaking kindergartners who were like natives. And I remember just walking, like after seeing that, like I was walking around my elementary school and like actually projecting these Wild West fantasies as like, onto all the classrooms and the gym and all of that. And there's another one I remember, number 5. It was the black chick versus the evil German ruin explorer or something like that. Who, there's one when he like turned into chocolate and then turned everyone into chocolate and all that. And yeah, and it's like, all of these like little mental vistas, like I said, these very much shaped our psyches, like I don't say I became obsessed with the mid-century Germans because of a Codename Kids Next Door episode, but
Maybe.
that could also be a that could also be a factor.
Definitely could. No, I try to imagine, what my childhood would be without stuff like that. And you kind of dismiss a lot of, or you underestimate sort of the value that stuff brings. But I think just at the very least, it probably leaves a type of impression that probably makes you more receptive to some of the stuff you're into now. Like the fact that you had like these Western influences on some of our like childhood TV shows, you got to imagine that makes you a little more normal to watching like a Wild West movie, because I know some of that stuff is kind of an age gap for people like us. And I know a lot of young people have no interest in things like, the 30s crime drama because you try and listen to the dialogue and it's cheesy, it's dated. But if some of that stuff does, like the music that's in Fallout New Vegas,
Mhm.
we probably wouldn't even care to hear about that stuff if it wasn't in our video game. But because it
Well,
gets integrated,
well, yeah, and that's true. And a lot of these franchises can kind of serve as a as almost a weird way as like monasteries did during the Dark Ages, as like these repositories of these pieces of culture from a bygone age that Zoomers didn't really grow up with, right? That didn't have exposed to them unless their dad was like a big movie aficionado or something like that. And really, this kind of speaks to the wider point of the Zoomers I was making earlier. Is it's like, what separates the Zoomers from every other generation is that they've had access to all media from all ages, more or less all the time, constantly, from the point when they were first conscious, which means they have no real structure. They have no real, I don't want to say discipline, but they have no real spirit of the age that forces them to fit one mold, which they can all kind of commonly see through. Because, for example, it's like in many ways, there were too many choices. Like, for you, Codename Kids Next Door popped up. I didn't even think about that. For me, it was Star Wars, the Clone Wars. That was the start of, right? And there's so many of these TV series, right? There are so many of these, not just TV series, but, DS and Game Boy games and like, Xbox 360 and PlayStation games and all of this other stuff. And, there's the kids who experienced it in the early 2000s and the ones in the mid 2000s and the one in the late 2000s and the 2010s. And really there is no commonality between any of them except for like things that are so big and so general, like GTA 5, like Call of Duty, that everyone played them, or TV shows, so big in general, like I guess these Cartoon Network shows are a good example that everyone watched them, right? So, it's this interesting phenomenon where everyone's constantly trying to differentiate themselves from each other because all this mainstream shit was what everyone was watching, and you can't like the mainstream stuff. So you have to find some random obscure, trash animated show that you may have watched an episode or two when you were a kid and like say, oh, that was my favorite. People talk about shit like Cat Dog. I hated Cat Dog. It was the stupidest show I watched in my life. I hate that show. There are a bunch of other stupid freaking shows that people say are good, like Rugrats. Rugrats was the dumbest shit I ever saw. It's in, and that's the thing is like, there were so many trash pieces of media put in with the good pieces of media. And it's like, when you're looking at it through the lens of nostalgia goggles, it's like, well, it's all the same, right? A couple of years ago, I made a point to go back and watch, when I was in high school, and I was first starting to come into like political consciousness. I made it a point to go back and watch a lot of shows I'd watched as a kid. Avatar: The Last Airbender is one of them, right? We could talk about that probably in a couple of minutes. That's something that could be a whole topic in and of itself. But I made a point to go back and like I watched maybe an episode of Power Rangers, and I'm like, I really like this shit. This is the worst writing I've ever seen in my life, and wooden acting and all of that. And it really was. And now I'm looking back at it, with the eyes I have, and I'm seeing all the subversive stuff that was in it, right? And so, to bring my sort of long rant to a close, it's like, yeah, there was all of this stuff that was put in our media. There was good stuff in it, sure, but a lot of it was really just subversive. The word psyop is overused, but like I guess there's no other real way to describe it. So I don't know what you think about that.
Well, I think I can't really speak to like how negative a lot of the subtlety was in our shows. I'd probably have to go back and watch it. A lot of the stuff that I remember is sort of the more one-dimensional shows like Ed, Ed, and Eddie. I know that that's kind of like basically just a modern day Tom and Jerry. But for those that remember like the finale, which I would encourage people to find that somewhere so that I can watch it again, because I think a lot of these Cartoon Network shows you can't even find reruns anymore. I think they took them off from the site or wherever they archived them. But that was a show that ended with a movie. I think it was the Big Picture Show and stuff like that. Again, it's not very complicated, but it was a nice, satisfactory conclusion. And it didn't take a lot to impress people, but it was still good writing. So I wouldn't say it was one dimensional. It's just they took the little things that we liked in our childhood and just sort of resolved it in a very like I don't know. I thought it was in a very complete way. And so looking back on stuff like that, I see a lot of the positive things that a lot of our shows were able to wrap up. I know like now with like The Simpsons and SpongeBob now, obviously, when shows peak and they just keep going, obviously we don't like stuff like that. That's a little more negative and just kind of ruining the legacy of some of that stuff. But I think the shows that had like 6 seasons, like KND, I think maybe that's one of the things we liked about them is making it easy to forget them because all we needed was that short window of time to enjoy it, and then we can have this nostalgia overload when we go back. I think that's a good utility, and so I don't know if you think that like the fact that they peak quicker than others, I don't know if you would say that that's like part of the reason some shows don't stand up because obviously the stuff we have now is can't really compete.
Well, I don't mean to put a Spenglerian reading on this, on fucking Zoomer nostalgia, but I could probably pretty easily put a Spenglerian reading on Zoomer nostalgia, right? We're seeing cycles of culture just go faster and faster and faster, right? We're getting to the point where golden ages last a decade, if not, if that, the golden age of video games lasted, I think, like 4 years, 2008, I think, to 2012. And yeah, you know, it's this, everything happens in cycles. Everything has like all of these, you know, a new art form comes about, or a new, you know, a new canon of writers with similar styles but different styles and different ideas. They come out and they all express themselves, and you start off with some really great quality, and then it just declines and declines and declines, and you have people politicizing stuff. And yeah, I mean, that, like you said, I mean, this goes a long way to sort of describe how, you know, how quickly these shows peaked, how quickly, you know, they were, you know, gone with the wind. They would come in one year and you'd really enjoy them, and I'm like, man, I really like that show. And then they'd stop showing it, and you're like, man, I missed that show. But then you'd get distracted with the next show, and you'd kind of start ignoring that it got a little bit worse. Or, you know, they're trying to go in one direction with it, or they were going in another direction with it, and you're like, I can see where they're trying to go, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. But it got to a point where, you know, anything new that they tried was just trite and stupid. And then you have something like, you know, a couple of years ago, I watched, you know, because my brothers were still in high school, I watched an episode of freaking Teen Titans Go, and the whole show is just like every dead high culture. It just becomes a caricature of what it used to be, right? To the point where I'm pretty sure there was even an episode of Teen Titans Go where it just made fun of all the old fans and called them basically losers for hearkening back to this bygone era. And it's like, oh, this is new, this is fun now. And I love Teen Titans. Teen Titans was one of those shows that I went back and I rewatched the whole fucking series because the writing was good. You know, the writing was fantastic. This was back when, you know, re-upload guys would last for like 4 or 5 months on YouTube. Like they could upload a whole TV series, and, you know, then they go down. And I found one guy who just uploaded the entire Teen Titans series, and I watched that as a kid, and that, or as a high school adult, and it was good. It was really good, and I connected to characters, and I remembered all my old, like, you know, TV crushes and all that, which is a whole other rabbit hole we could go down into our waifus. Matter of fact, hey, I'm gonna ask the chat real quick. I'm gonna check the chat. All right, I'm gonna check the chat right now. If you are Team Starfire, you need to put 1 in the chat. And if you are Team Raven, you need to put 2 in the chat right now. Let's go. I need to see who I'm gonna block.
Yeah, we'll make you a moderator so that you can have, you know, vigilante justice in the chat for I think you just scared everybody. I think everyone.
No, we're seeing them coming. We're seeing some men of culture. We're seeing this one fucking contrarian thinking he's cool putting a number 3. Yeah, I see you, Lance Meyer. You think you're fucking cool trying to break out of this dichotomy. Go fuck yourself. I'm just kidding. I love you.
So to segue from that, I think that is a very good point about the time span. And I think that speaks to the writing, and maybe that's because of the pre-Gamergate standard. I don't know if it all owes itself to that, but that is strange how, you know, like you said, a modern golden age is very limiting. And even with video games, that's another place where, you know, before 2013 or so, you know, you just had this higher standard. And it seems like that's, I don't know. I don't know exactly what motivates people to just stray away from creativity and just go with the flow. I guess there's no incentive to create a long-lasting franchise now. I guess they feel like the legacy's already been built by the best-selling games of the last 20 years.
No, yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, but that's the thing though, right? It's like, you know, the art form has exhausted itself, right? And every art form just exhausts itself quicker and quicker and quicker because it's shallower and shallower and shallower, right? It took, I think, 300 years for painting to exhaust itself, right? It took, I think, like 500 years for, you know, theology to exhaust itself. You know, it took starting with Bach, I'd say probably ending with Wagner. It took about 200 years for sort of classical music to exhaust itself. And so you can just kind of see this as each art form skipping from thing to thing to thing. You know, it took about 100 years for most of the French, like the whole concept of the novel to kind of exhaust itself, right? When was the last great novel written? You could argue Thomas Pynchon in the 1960s, but like the era of the novel was pretty much like post-Napoleonic out to, like, you know, the 19th. I think the last great novel written, like the last great novel written, was a Blood Meridian. by Cormac McCarthy. And so, and after that, it's like it goes into the movie scenes, and you have this golden age of film and like the 30s and the 40s. And you're a big film guy, so you know a lot more about that than I do. But then you see with the repeal of the Hays Code, and you see the quality just dropping off and dropping off. But even still, in like the 60s and the 70s, and even into the 80s, you had this like golden age of like great historical epics. Of these great sort of historical, like Waterloo comes to mind. Waterloo's a fantastic movie, just in the fact of how they were able to just recreate that battle, and there was no CGI, and like they had an entire Soviet infantry division that they trained in Napoleonic tactics and equipped with Napoleonic uniforms to have that movie shot. Same thing with like Gettysburg. I know Gettysburg was in the 90s. Gettysburg is to this day one of my favorite movies, right? Just because of the sort of sheer authenticity of the amount of reenactors that showed up to participate in it, and the love and the care that was put into the movie, right? But even still, you're seeing these art forms exhaust themselves faster and faster and faster. What is there after video games? I don't fucking know. I mean, you could even say like the right-wing Twitter sphere, as disgusting as it is, like YouTube itself. Yeah, YouTube was an art form, right? YouTube exhausted itself within like 10 years, right? The dissident right is the only entertaining thing on Twitter anymore. And even that, like Bab was talking about this on one of his recent shows, but even the discourse of the dissident right has kind of degraded since 2016, And so I don't know. I don't know what the future holds. At least I'm a writer, and I have some sort of hope that the sort of American mythos that I'm writing about will in some ways inspire a new generation of some sort of cultural revival. Because I'm not the only one writing about these types of themes, but it really is disheartening to kind of see, and this is my speech at the event. For those of you, if anyone in the chat was at the event and heard my speech, it's because of the stuff I was talking about, both in my speech and in the Q&A, is like, well, this is why I feel like the West is dying. It's not dying because it's like, all of a sudden a meteor hits and everyone who said that they were a European or a Westerner just immediately dies tomorrow, but because like we're just constantly reliving our own stereotypes. We're just constantly, there's no new art forms coming out. There's no new culture. There's no new archetypes, right? It's all just reiterations, rehashings, perpetual looping, reliving their own, just caricaturizing their own culture. So, yeah, I mean, you could extrapolate. I'm sure, Ace, you could probably take this and extrapolate it onto some sort of like Zoomer Media type thing.
Well, I think you're right that, like you said with YouTube, for example, I remember someone said a while ago, I don't remember who, but YouTube, someone said like they can't censor every political commentator on the internet because they're going to lose money. And it's like, that just speaks to the short-sightedness of some of the people on our side, because like a lot of people know that all YouTube needs to pay the bills is all of those tutorial videos, all of those like gift wrapping, unboxing videos. Like those are the people keeping YouTube, relevant and their numbers up. And so, like you said, there's no incentive for creativity. And maybe if you want to get into how that's probably due to one of the byproducts of mass production, back then, but before you had just sort of this mass media, like you said, it's it's sort of the illusion of choice, but everything is very monolithic. Even
well, and I don't mean to interrupt you if you had something else you wanted to put with that, but it's like, look, it's like they don't even need to ban every right-wing content creator, right? They just need to take out the most original ones. They just need to take out the ones that are, talking about the most, the ones who are being the most edgy, right? The ones who are, naming them, so to speak, or finding creative takes to or creative ways to say the two words that both start with the 8th letter of the alphabet. And and so it's like this is how they degrade discourse. Is it's like, well, look, they don't even need to like kill our community. They just need to take out the most interesting voices. Those right-wing content creators who aren't here anymore, a lot of them were among the best, right? And I'm not saying that this is like, I'm not saying this to black pill, because there's still plenty of creative people here, and there's tons of people who have, found ways to adapt and take euphemisms and all of that. But it's like, as always, the expression is, running itself into the ground, like meme culture, dude. You remember like meme culture, I think, had its run from, I think, 2014 to, I'd say, probably 2020. 2020 was about where, but it's like, you always had a new meme format come out. You always had like a new sort of like creative reinterpretation, like a particular screen from a particular TV series, or some like obscure reference that some people had like a memory of a memory of. And but even then, like around 2020, around when COVID hit, and I mean, Trump, meme magic did elect Donald Trump, in my opinion. Like Trump was memed into office. And, now it's like even that form has kind of exhausted itself. So I don't know. I mean, I don't mean to sound like a broken record here, but it's like, it's the art form really does just come to its own natural limits. And, each art form being shallower than the last, has a shorter lifespan, has a shorter run before it does hit those natural limits, or outside forces kind of end it prematurely,
Yeah, and I don't say it as a black pill either to say, yes, we've probably reached the peak of some of the internet right-wing culture, but I would strongly advise people to just go back and go on a nostalgia trip. And I don't think that that's like living in denial or living in the past. I think there is so much content that I think a lot of people even forgot, even people like Porcelain, who does documentaries about all the lore that even people here probably missed or forgot about. I mean, I just think there's a lot of good memories, like nostalgia for an age that you didn't live through. If people miss some of the stuff back in during the time, to me, I think it's a lot of fun to just check out the archives. And there's no shortage of stuff like that because it lasted, like you said, for so long. And so I don't really think there's people really have a good reason to be blackpilled right now, because I think it's really not that far long ago. It's not like we're talking about, looking back at a renaissance. I mean, this is stuff that's in our living memory. And so I think some of that stuff is going to be coming back. That's my prediction. I think some of that grassroots Wild West. I think it's going to have some type of revival, and I don't know where we're going to find it or who's going to be at the helm, but I think stuff like that is it's just too people cherish it too much for it to just be permanently lost to, some banhammer. I can't believe that it's going to just die in darkness, because it was like you said, it got someone into the presidency. It galvanized, anons worldwide uniting. So stuff like that, I think there's no way that's lost. There's just no way.
Well, yeah, and as they always say, the fire that burns twice as bright lasts half as long, right? Well, meme culture certainly burned fucking bright for as long as it burned. And, pretty soon it did kind of collapse into nothing. And, matter of fact, someone in the chat mentioned Moon Man. Yeah, Moon Man was probably one of the most nostalgic examples of like meme culture, of edgy meme culture, back when like 2014 4chan, right? When before 4chan got taken over by the Magatar. Now 4chan is basically like diet Reddit. But yeah, back when everyone on there was like, basically a neo-Nazi, and it was funny as shit. And real ideas were coming out of there, and real culture was being created on 4chan messaging boards, right? And that's the trippiest thing to think about, is that like, the word based, which I think originated on 4chan, is now just an everyday word that everyone uses, right? When I hear normies calling each other based, they have no idea where it comes from. It is I don't want to say it's concerning, but it's like, well, shit, now we have to use a different word. So I don't know. I mean, yeah, it is sad to think that it will die in darkness, but at the same time, it's like, it's
I
something
don't
that
think
was meant
I
to
don't think
happen.
it I don't think it really died in darkness. I just think we're in an era right now where we're just sort of in the wait and see phase. And so I don't really see that as negative, but it's just, we it's been, a few years since the peak. And so I think now we're just trying to grasp exactly what we lost, because I know, like, when I look back at Cartoon Network, I didn't know that that was going to be the golden era. That was just the norm for me. That was the standard. And it's that old expression of you don't know what you have until you look back in the past. But I just think stuff like that doesn't go away. You know what I'm saying? It lives in people, and so that's why I say it hasn't lost its relevancy, even if it is in the past right now. Don't want to
Yeah.
say that's always going to be the case.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know.
Bass,
I don't have anything else to add on this topic.
sure. Bass guitarist says I watched the debut episode of SpongeBob when it premiered 1999. I was 8. I'm a millennial. SpongeBob is ours. Sorry, guys. That's bass guitarist with $5.
Well,
That is
bass
a strong
guitarist
point.
is a fucking idiot who is completely incorrect. I'm just I love you, my man. I do. But that's just I just got frostbite from how cold that take was.
Yeah, we love bass guitarists. Always wait a second. Sorry, now
Paul, try not to insult everyone in the chat challenge. Impossible.
yeah, but I mean, yeah,
That's something I just yeah,
go
no,
for it.
that's
Yeah,
just something I just thought of is the sort of the self-referential nature of Zoomer humor, right? All of Zoomer humor is based around referencing and externalizing where the humor comes from instead of like commenting on things that you observe internally. And I guess once again, this is just another point of like the rootlessness of the sort of Zoomer generation is that like they have nothing internal to base their humor on. So their humor is actually very sort of exterior and feminine. They base it all on exterior things, on things that everyone kind of knows about. It's like, whether it's memes or whether it's references to TV series. And the millennials kind of suffer from some of this, but it's like, it's not, the millennials, they're more on like cringe humor. And I fucking despise cringe humor. Anyone who tells me The Office is good, I just immediately want to hurt someone. Whenever they tell me The Office is good, The Office is terrible. The Office is cancer. I got into a full-on argument with my cousins at a family function once about. I said The Office is not a good show that people will remember in 50 years, and they said no, it's a good show. It's got good plot points and good writing, and then.
Well, I think that's one of those cases where, like, The Simpsons like peaked, but when you have a show that kind of starts in that aftermath point, you know what I mean? Like it's like the first episode of The Office is like past the peak of The Simpsons, if I'm making that clear. It's like I feel like that's where a lot of the comedy is today. It's sort of in the ruins of the kind of post early 2000s humor. And it's like, we're not talking about going back 50 years, just go back to like literally right before. You know what I mean? It's like people act like that's a big challenge, but it's, aren't you guys supposed to like do this for a living and, you know, figure out what works on a on a set? Anyways,
Yeah, and someone in the chat mentioned Family Guy, and I mean that's kind of case in point. Family Guy really, yeah, it really turned a generation onto that kind of humor, this sort of self-referential, random sort of like cutaway gags. They literally had a name for it, cutaway gags. And it's just the whole point of the show was literally just to make a reference to probably everything possible. And yeah, I mean, yeah, the more you look at this, the more you kind of see that like all of the media kind of pointed to this sort of thing.
yeah, gags ruined television, literally. That's it's kind of amazing how direct of a source we can we can narrow down exactly what ruined our television. But I was gonna say something else. Something about like the shift in comedy.
It seems today that all we see is violence in movies and sex. Read the chats.
All right, all right.
Let's see what they're saying. See if there's
something.
We've got to constantly, we got a whole audience of Zoomers. We have to constantly be making fucking noise to entertain the
That's
goddamn
right.
Zoomers.
Otherwise they're
We need,
not, you know,
we need
low
to,
attention span Zoomer.
yeah, we need to keep their ADHD minds
Con-
fucking busy.
constant sensation. You know, never a dull moment with our Zoomer audience.
Oh no, of course not. No, yeah, no self-reflection, and contemplation. Nope, nope. We don't like those. We like a quick and easy. We like fast, fast, fast.
The other aspect of comedy, this wasn't. I don't think this is what I was trying to remember, but the problem with stuff like Family Guy is when that stuff is the standard, because people say, "Oh, just go watch the show that you like." That show and its influence on the pop culture will make other writers in the future self-censor and reduce their creativity to that level. So it's not just an isolated case where one show is bad, therefore go look for the good ones. This bad show is literally having like an effect. It's a very Hegelian thing. You know, the superstructure of Family Guy is it's trickling down to the every writer's room in Hollywood and Silicon Valley and just corrupting all of the writers to go in that direction. So that's why it's not just like, oh, one show, who cares? Like it's like they have the biggest megaphone, and of course, you know, that has to be called out because it's literally gonna make people self-censor in their minds when they're writing a joke because this is what they're told is what people like. So that's why it's such a big deal. It's not just like it's one show and oh whatever, man. It's, you know, that's a genre. Okay, well this genre is literally like dominating all the others and it has no right to.
Yeah, no, that's true. And yeah, no, that's kind of, you're right. It's like this negative feedback loop that kind of kills all of these, expressions of art forms. It's like, well, the next generation of writers grows up being inspired by the previous generation of writers, they self-censor, and then the next generation of writers self-censor, and then it's just on and on and on and on and on. And it doesn't end well. It doesn't
That's
go to a good place.
that's why you need your Sam Hydes out there. You know,
Yeah.
I know that like, you know, some people in LA are going to think that that's divisive. It's like, no, this is, you know, the comedy sphere is supposed to be this, you know, this basically Wild West. You know, it's supposed to be this like chaotic order that people can kind of get inspired by, but you know,
Well, yeah, and in many ways, you can kind of turn this towards politics. You can turn this towards the shape that politics started to take. Um, because when faced with this culture of unseriousness, the whole country, a lot of people in the country used to just not really give a fuck about politics, right? Not really care about it. It was just that one thing that you went out and talked about every now and again. But it's like now it's like um, politics kind of became this sort of island of seriousness, this bastion of sincerity and officialdom, in a sort of island of cancerous familiarity, as I call it. Like that's another thing. That's another thing about the sort of the Zoomer generation, all that, is that everything is too informal and familiar. Like everything is trying to like not be that guy, that no one is that guy then, right? Everything is trying to be like, intimate. Everyone's trying to share everything about themselves. And when everyone is intimate, no one is. It's weird. It's weird that you kind of have to artificially, not just in your personal life, but you have to kind of artificially make yourself scarce, and in order to preserve a semblance of normal social relations. Like everyone is so busy pulling each other towards themselves that they don't realize that they're pushing each other out at arm's length through familiarity. I don't know. I'm trying to turn several poetic phrases at once. I don't know if anyone kind of um I don't know if anyone's understanding where I'm coming from with that, but it's like, it really is like, and it's contributed to the degradation of politics, because it's like, well, people are now finding meaning in the dumbest shit, politics being one of those things that they're finding meaning in. And that's because it's just this bastion of unfamiliarity. It's this bastion of sort of officialdom, of things sounding nice and rehearsed and pretty and all this other stuff. And I mean, yeah, it's sports fans, right?
right. No, it's literally sports. I mean, yeah. I I will not do a show on sports, but yeah, that's the whole thing is
I'll do a
it's
show on NASCAR. I really like NASCAR. A lot
All
of people
right.
shit talk NASCAR, but there's a really good content creator, and he does have an occasional shit lib take, but he did just do a show on Moon Man. All right, Moon Man he actually did do a show on it, but Emplemon, Emperor Lemon on YouTube. And what he does is basically like long form video essays that are creative nonfiction. He finds ways to tell story. That's the genre of what he does is creative nonfiction. Like he's done several NASCAR videos, and that's what got me back into NASCAR. And NASCAR isn't so much a sport as it is watching rednecks zoom around a track and get into fights with each other. But yeah, I mean, I would recommend everyone in the chat check out Emplemon's content, because it really is a sort of blast from the past of Americana, and he actually has been a very large influence on my sort of American mythos idea that I'm trying to summon into being on my Substack. So yeah, I mean, also for everyone who's curious, my favorite NASCAR driver of all time is Bill Elliott. Awesome Bill from Dawsonville. He went fast, and that is why I like him, because he was fast.
Strong argument. Can't really argue. Yeah, Edward, I'll get back to you on that. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Oh, hey Edward. Hey, thanks for reading my Substack. I appreciate it. I love the support.
Yo, let's go. Yo, Bass Guitarist claims that Hey Arnold was the first multicultural show. So I think I got to do a retraction on that. I don't know exactly what the timeline is. But,
whenever I hear anyone talk about Hey Arnold, for some reason I have a mental link between Hey Arnold and Five Nights at Freddy's. I don't know why, but that is the mental link that I have in my head, is that whenever anyone mentions Hey Arnold, my mind just goes to Freddy Fazbear, and that's another fucking. I'm not even going to go down that rabbit hole. That's one of those things that exists that shouldn't exist.
There might be a link to like how I remember in high school, when women would call themselves gamers, it's because they had stuff on their phone. And the idea that like even like, the video game industry already got subverted. And now you have, you've reduced video games to like these little phone, like app games. And so like the fact that it just got more and more commodified. I mean, there's like a very blatant example for people that think that I'm just rambling about how things got different. What do you don't like change? No, literally no. So like the fact that you have even like apps have been like categorized in this very like annoying way. That's just another thing that I think goes hand in hand with like all these shows that just degraded.
Hey, real quick, Ace. Lance Meyer, you're really starting to fucking piss me off calling my favorite driver average, dog. I'm gonna come for you now.
All right, we got some banter in chat. Very
good
stuff. Remember, guys, this is an interactive audience. Okay, we do this for you. So if please, any helpful critique, constructive criticism, we're very open to any and all critiques. You guys make the show possible. So
there you go. Yeah, he corrected himself. Yeah, that's right.
This is democracy.
This is democracy. God damn it. I fortified his opinion. I ensured his opinion was fortified, right?
Created incentive, of course.
Yeah.
All right. We've been going for 1 hour for the show that was delayed for basically an hour. I just want to say, overall, we kind of jumped to a lot of different topics, but the one that sticks out in my mind is, Cartoon Network was basically like our, the places where we played our Flash animation games. That was like our original Twitter. That was our sphere, our social circle. And so, that was something that, maybe we don't put a lot of stock in today, but definitely definitive for Generation Z. And I definitely think that stuff like that is, we're probably going to get quality like that eventually, because I really do think, like you were saying with the Spenglerian cycle, there has to be a point where writers are fed up with their own mediocrity, because that's what it is. I just think that a lot of this stuff is going to be
pendulum
swinging. I
That
just
fucking cut deep.
I think the pendulum swinging is something that people should really be prepared for, because I think people are going to be here for it, and there's going to be content for a lot of Zoomers. So I think people should stay tuned.
Yeah, no, that's true. And if my sort of whole American mythos thing I'm trying to bring into beating succeeds or fails, it's like I'm not the only one who's writing right now. I'm not the only one who's trying to make something new, trying to create culture forms for us to grab onto, to bring up old culture forms and the like. And it's like, yeah, and this is how the world sort of orders itself. This is how history turns. This is how what Hegel would call the cunning of reason, I think. Or I'm probably fucking that up. I'm not a Hegel guy, but like it really is just the zeitgeist turning and the zeitgeist shifting from this sort of stultified, dead, rotting corpse, which was the early 2000s, which can only find expression through media and like these weird art forms. And now it's like, real life is turning into the chaotic expressions of the rootless Zoomer. And I think from that, something new will be born, something that's more meaningful inherently than than what has been around for the past 20 years. My guru Sri Dharma Acharya Pravartika, I probably fucked up his name because I always fuck up his name, but because it's a long name, but says that we're on the cusp of a 10,000-year golden age within the Kali Yuga, where the progress of the Kali Yuga will be halted and in many ways reversed. And I really do have to hold to that. I really do have to believe that we are at this sort of point where the chaos and insanity of the world has become obvious to all of us, and we're going to try to do everything in our power to correct it and bring it back to what the world is supposed to be, you know and that's kind of the best way I can conclude these sort of thoughts.
And I think we're in the beginning stage of that too, because obviously we got our own things going on. Bass guitarist, he's been filling me in on. He's got he's doing music with, I mean, like legit guys, and so I just think that people through their own creativity, they're gonna find their place. And I think that I think Zoomers, right now it's looking nihilistic. If you go on TikTok, very easy to get blackpilled. I really do think we're playing the long game, and just through whatever it is, whether it's networking or whatever things that people got going on, I think we're gonna have some long-term benefits if people stick around to see it. So
Yeah, very much so.
all right. Thank you everybody for showing up, tuning in. Thank you for everyone that donated. Oros, bass guitarist, I love you guys. So thank all you guys for this. Is Paul Fahrenheit again. Plug your thing, man, of course.
Yeah, read my shit on Substack. Apparently, it's good. So I'm trying to, yeah, as I've said, I'm trying to sort of write this new American mythology into being with tons of mental vistas from Americana and from my own personal recollections and all this other stuff. Actually, Edward the Pale just asked me a question. Have you read The Darkest Hour by It's called The Hour of Decision, my man. And yes, the Hour of Decision is sort of his last text. He gets some things wrong in it, but that's kind of, if you're going to read anything from Spengler other than Decline of the West or Man in Technics, read The Hour of Decision. That's like the last major work he wrote that's translated into English. But yeah, just to finish off my shilling, follow me on Twitter at Cav King Paul. Unless you're a woman. If you're a woman, please let me know so I can block you. And otherwise, just stay tuned. I have more stuff I'm working on.
Yep, and same over here. So thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you guys next time.
Peace out.